Hello, 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 and welcome back to On the Record, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Shure in association with Ropeadope. My name is Louis Marks. I'm here at the Ropeadope room just outside Philadelphia. If you're just getting to this show, you're a little late. This is the last episode of season one, so you've got some work to do to track backwards. It's an amazing show. Each week, Dekel Bor spends an hour with some of the greatest producers and engineers on the planet, digging into motivation and technique and talking about life. Big thanks to Shure for giving us the platform. Season one is wrapping up today. And we have the great pleasure of welcoming Mr. Damian Taylor from Los Angeles. Damian is a six-time Grammy-nominated producer, mixer, programmer, best known for his collaborations with so many: The Prodigy, Björk, Arcade Fire, The Killers, Temper Trap, UNKLE, City of the Sun, Naeem and Dizzy. In addition to his work as a producer and mixer, Damian is increasingly tapped as a songwriter, recently working with Jon Batiste and many more. Guitarist Dekel Bor has performed with the greats Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and many others. And his recent release, Let Love Rule, was a shining light in 2020 and is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. Thanks for tuning in. You can play back episodes. Please do share this. I think there's some news about giving away things. I'm not real sure. We'll check it out. Let's go over to Berlin and welcome Mr. Dekel Bor. Dekel, how are you?
All right. The last one. It's been nothing but a pleasure and joy and a learning and quite a steep learning curve for me. For anyone who's tuning in, this album is out. It's been doing incredibly well, mostly thanks to you guys. But in the jazz world, we have this tradition where, in order to make the next step, we reach out to our peers, to our mentors, to our heroes, and we ask for advice. And usually that happens backstage, before a gig, after the gig, at a festival's green room, or this and that. With COVID basically putting everything to halt, uh, we figured this could be the next best thing. So, welcome to my Berlin studio in the heart of Kreuzberg, where I'm working on an album right now, and I figured I could use some help. So, without further ado, the one and only Damian Taylor. Damian, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, good to see you.
Man, I've been so looking forward to this. We've been trying to get together for a while.
It
Trying to
has
get
been a minute that we've been chatting, totally. But nice to see you in the virtual flesh, as it were,
There we
finally.
go. There we
Yeah.
go. So how are things in LA? You're safe. Your loved ones are safe. Everybody's well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, one of the lovely things about LA, and one of the reasons I wound up here, I've lived all over the world, but it's one of the few music centers in the world where you can have like a bigger house. So this studio
Ah,
you're seeing, it's a room in the house. So if if you don't look on the internet, don't read the news, and just look out the window, it's absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, otherwise we're
beautiful.
all just taking care of each other and staying safe, and doing things on the internet.
That's great to hear. So with all this time we had on our hands, any few releases that you've been inspired by as a fan that you could share with us?
Oh my god! What I've been listening to mostly is actually Beretta, who's a member of a band called the Glitch Mob. They
Hmm.
pioneered like a kind of a slower, very heavy duty electronic sound. He curates this ambient playlist and just adds to it every week. And so mostly when I'm not working on records, I need to just have something very kind of like peaceful and serene in the house. So I've been listening to that one on loop anytime I'm not making music. That's been my big
Ah,
inspiration.
beautiful. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
So how did music start out for you? I mean, what was the moment that that the light bulb went on and you thought, this is it.
Right.
I
Well,
found the
I'm gonna. There's the two-step answer. The first is, my parents put me on piano when I was young, and I did kind of classical stuff up to about age 13 or 14. Not to a very high level, but enough to keep super busy. Then I realized I hated that music. Took a year out of playing music, and then started buying records like crazy. Worked a part-time job. All of my money I spent on buying records. And for the youngsters who are watching, you used to have to actually take money to a building and give
and
it
who
to someone
Who would get the money? I mean, Apple
Right?
would get the money.
Yeah,
Who would get all
exactly.
that money?
Yeah, I mean, it would go. Yeah, the music shop and the label would get it. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? Wouldn't go to a CEO in Stockholm either. Wouldn't go to Joe Rogan, you know. But yeah, you'd have to go and get a job, work for a certain number of hours of your life and exchange that for music. So that was I just got crazy
Well,
and into
I got
buying.
into that
Yeah,
game now. Like I'm buying records like crazy. Except I don't have a job now. I used to be touring.
totally.
So at a
Yeah, yeah.
certain point, somebody's got to give. But any few albums that you remember from those times that you were like,
I mean, for
going to
me, yeah,
school?
when I was like a teenager, I'm in my early 40s, so I was basically lucky to be a teenager when like grunge happened. So it was basically for me like the golden era of hip hop. For me, the preeminent artists were like Public Enemy. Fear of a Black Planet was a massive influence on me when I was 11 or
Absolutely.
12. And then that one rolling over through like Primal Scream, Screamadelica. So Andrew Weatherall is like a profound influence on me. And then into kind of crazy guitar bands. So a little bit of like, Smashing Pumpkins were huge for me. But then I got into like more of the kind of weird British bands that were doing like super trippy stuff. And then that dovetailed into discovering Warp Records and MoWax. So a combination of sampling and kind of music tech. And that's when I really dove more deeply into technology with music.
And at that point, were you combining synths with electronics, with your piano skills, with, I mean, what was it like?
Well, I mean, the full disclosure, I only did piano for a few years and I played trumpet for a bit. But basically, so this was pre-internet as well. So, but when I was at high school, the last couple of years of high school, my parents actually moved to Saudi Arabia. I was living in New Zealand at the time.
Wow,
So I moved to
wow, wow.
Auckland and I was living in the basement of this elderly couple to go to this one school. And so basically, all I did was listen to records. And a good friend of mine, that's when I started playing bass as well. So then there's a friend of mine at school, he played drums. He was an amazing drummer. And at some point, he told me there's a thing called a 4-track. And I'd never heard of recording before. So started looking in the classified section in the newspaper, and basically sold my mountain bike and bought a 4-track. But the thing that happened in parallel was I went to visit my parents in Saudi Arabia.
When
I'd see
you're
them.
looking back at it now,
Yeah.
would the mountain bike take you further in life or the
Oh, no
four-track?
way, man. The 4-track all the way.
I
Unless you're going
had to go
literally
for
or
that one.
metaphorically. Yeah,
I
yeah.
had to go for that one. Yeah.
But it's fun. I mean, I spent like 2 years saving up for that mountain bike as well. It was like my dream kind of mountain bike, but figured it out. But yeah, I mean, going back to your first question, it was around that time that I actually realized, like, I was reading credits and going, oh, there are actually people who make records. And I got realized I was like more and more into like how records sounded and felt. And then I'd start seeing like some of the similar names cropping up on different records I like. That would have been like, Butch Vig or Flood or whatever were kind of the main ones at the time. Not that I couldn't afford a huge amount of records, but just started seeing like, oh, there's actually people who work on these different things, and that person did that record, and you can kind of feel there's a thread that connects them, even though the bands themselves are really different. So that was really exciting. But yeah, I didn't get into actual music technology until a few years later after I'd had the 4-track. I started doing an audio engineering degree part-time in Auckland. So that was like 2 nights a week. And then I waited on tables 5 nights a week,
Wow.
and bought an Amiga 500 where you could get like an 8-bit sampler card. And learn to program in hexadecimal on like Octamed, which is a tracker program. So for anyone who doesn't know, that's like you just have these columns of numbers that go and scroll down the screen, and you poke these codes into that, and you'd use it to program music for video games. Um, but yeah, and then, again, this is where we have to say like it's such an incredible time to make music, because if you can buy a laptop and like a copy of Ableton Live or something, you have these phenomenal tools. Whereas,
Absolutely.
I don't know how old you are, but like, saving it going, oh my God, I want a sampler. Okay, that's like $3,000. I'm going to save up for another kind of like 9 months or get a summer job. And then you need a mixer.
But you know
So,
that even if you're not into Ableton, you want to be a singer-songwriter and you want to
mhm,
change the world with your songs. I mean, there are people like Sufjan Stevens that route that record everything in their own living room
mhm,
with an M box and a 58. I mean, the whole
totally.
album on a 58.
Yeah.
And I just had I just heard one of the best acoustic guitar sounds on a 58 from someone that had like, I mean, it was like a native instrument, $70 sort of. I mean, it's really unbelievable.
Yeah. No, it's incredible what you can do with just like time and really thinking about stuff and microphone placement. You know,
Yeah.
it's like the microphone placement is like a far bigger differentiator probably in any aspect of your sound right now, and just, you know, taking the time to listen to where things are pointing and making sure your instrument's good and your performance is good, you can achieve so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what was the next step when you, the next step for you from going to Oakland to
The
going to
big step was, you know, I realized very early on I wanted to move to London. My parents are British, so I had the passport. So basically, when I was 19, I packed up my little suitcase and, you know, stayed with an old friend of my mum's for a month, got a job in a pizza restaurant, and just sent out CVs to every studio in London. And one guy got back to me who had a studio in his living room in Brixton. So I got you know, got a room in a flat share in Brixton, which was rad, and just started working in this guy's living room basically. And he, you know, I'd actually been working at a studio in New Zealand before that for a year that did audio post and music for ads. So that was kind of great. I wound up getting actually two separate jobs in post, just like as a runner in the studio. But that was nice to see like a professional environment, and that was also my first exposure. Actually, not my first exposure, my second exposure to Pro Tools, but a chance to get a more immersed in Pro Tools. So this was around 97, 98. And then, yeah, the guy in London was actually a French guy called Dominique Brett. He had a studio called Wolf Studios. And it was like, you know, advertised in the back of Sound on Sound magazine, £15 an hour or something like that. So you just get anything through the door. So he hired me ostensibly to be a T-boy. But 2 hours into the first day there, he just looked at me and shrugged and left the room. So basically, he was just really bored. So it wound up actually being one of those really old school studio situations where it's like you're the house engineer and you engineer everything that comes through the door. And it can be a gospel band, it could be a jazz
I
band, it could
would
be like
think,
a singer from
I would think
Eritrea.
that these kind of situations, I would think that you learn some kind of chops that you could not get anywhere else.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, and also I think just being exposed to so many different kinds of people and ways of working and saying, okay, we have one day. So how do you get on someone's wavelength straight away? You know, and you know, it wasn't like I was terribly experienced at the time either, but it was all attitude and yeah, like I think the biggest thing that I really learned there was learning to listen the way that my clients were listening. So, you know, if there's
What does that mean for you?
well, for me, it's like let's be real. Like if you're going to £15 an hour studio, the ratio of records that come in, some of them are gonna like not be to your taste. Shall we put that diplomatically? But if you're actually looking at the artist going, what is it that they're excited about with this? You know, like I have my taste, which might be over here. But either you're going to sit there going, this music sucks. Do you know what I mean? Which is not a vibe. You're going to be going, like, how are they listening to it? Why are they excited about it? What are they keying into? What is it for them that makes this music meaningful? So I really focused on that. At the same time as, you know, the studio is actually really well equipped as well. So lots of toys to play with. But that really became the key thing.
That I actually think that there was that excitement of whoever is playing in that room is probably the most important thing. I mean, if I'm there's like a year in Coldplay's life where he just got clean, and you can hear him exploding with excitement.
Mm.
And I hear the first Guns N' Roses album, and you hear them exploding with excitement. Or you would hear the New York Philharmonic with certain conductors, everything is up tempo, so you hear the excitement of them playing something differently for the first time. I mean, that kind of speaks volume, regardless of who's playing in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. And then if you're in a situation as like an engineer or a producer and you're too wrapped up in your own crap to join in on that vibe, then you're going to miss out on a lot. Do you know what I mean? So it's like whatever your personal predisposition is kind of irrelevant. And that became like really magic. Then suddenly just like, and also because remember, I'd been like a teenager in New Zealand, which is one of the most remote countries. I was on the South Island of New Zealand before I lived in Auckland. So just like, oh my God, there's like a Latin group and the singers from Chile and the producers from Argentina. And then, like I said, like, I actually have to tell you about this one album. There is an Eritrean singer and his producer, and the producer had one of those little Yamaha QY70. It was like a VHS all-in-one kind of sequencer and sound module. And they brought in one 8-at tape. I think they had like 2 hours. So they spent the first hour, put the 8-at in record, and basically like played these songs back to back. And then the next hour, the singer went into the booth and recorded the whole album in one take without stopping. You know what I mean? But like such a vibe. And anyway, and you know, then you'd have like the bizarre drum and bass groups coming in from London. So it was a really exciting time, just largely for the exposure to all this
So
other.
one day, Björk's Björk comes in after just doing homogenic, and she wants to do Vespertine at that 15
Almost,
miles an
actually, like
hour.
literally
Almost, right?
almost. So yeah, I'd been there for a year and was actually starting to go like, oh my gosh, I need to like get into some of these other studios in London, and how am I going to do it? So I was trying to figure it out. And the long story short is there's a producer, songwriter, absolute genius dude called Guy Sigsworth, and
Of
he
course.
had produced an album for a band called Mandalay, I think, and the engineer had come into that studio because someone knew someone on the studio, so he got brought in as a freelance engineer, which is amazing for me because I think there's 2 freelance engineers that came in the whole time. And as a side note, I'd been like really consciously studying Pro Tools, and I learned the keyboard shortcuts that were on the mouse mat. That was like my big, I'm gonna learn these, gonna nail it. So they wound up having some tapes that were actually flown over from David Torn, crazy experimental guitar player
Of course. I
from New
love him.
York. So I wound up
I
like
love him.
editing a bunch of these things to fly back onto tape. So the engineer was like, oh, this kid is kind of good on Pro Tools. And then the engineer, Michael Aid was his name, he sees Guy at a Mandalay show, and Guy says, I'm looking for somewhere cheap to mess around on Pro Tools with someone good. So Michael
Perfect.
basically told him, oh, there's a studio in Brixton and this kid Damien, and you should go work with him. And I was still 20 years old at the time. So the guy came in, we did 3 days together, and at the end of this session, I plucked up the courage and was like, Guy, I'm looking to go freelance. Do you have any advice? And he said, well, actually, I've got another project coming up. I'd love to work with you on it. Why don't you come and work with me on that? So the next thing we did was like Studio 3 at Strong Room, which was one of my dream studios. And the next thing was at Olympic
Unbelievable.
Studios. And
Unbelievable.
that wound up being the early stages of Vespertine as well. So
Wow.
it was
Wow.
literally,
Wow.
you
Wow.
meet the one
Wow.
person.
Wow.
We're doing other stuff, but Guy basically co-wrote some stuff on Homogenic. He co-wrote Unravel.
Of course.
He
Yeah.
was Björk's musical director for her first 2
I
tours.
don't want to. I don't know if this is the time to say so, but we
Uh-huh.
just confirmed him for the next season. So I'm gonna say hi for you.
Oh, really? Oh, amazing. That's
Yeah, yeah,
great.
yeah, absolutely.
Damn.
He's kind, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Awesome.
So you start working as a 20-year-old on Vespertine?
I think by the time Vespertine rolled over, I might have been 21. Yeah, but
Wow.
first working with Guy,
Same age,
spent
but I
my
mean, wow,
yeah.
wow,
In the
wow.
Antipodes, your 21st birthday is a really big deal, but I was in the studio on my 21st birthday, and I wouldn't have had it any other way, so no one knew about it.
So
But
what is it like to sit in the room and you open the monitors and her voice is jumping out? I mean,
it's amazing, I mean, especially like the first time, like I was working with Guy. We actually did a remix for one of her tracks, "All Is Full of Love," before I met her. But like that first thing of like hearing a multi-track cracked open and like there she is, and I remember around that time because also I started working with UNKLE about the same time, and DJ Shadow's album Introducing was like a massive influence on me. So this is actually just after Shadow left, but Mo Wax and James Lavelle, all that kind of thing were like huge deals for me. And just like going, oh my gosh, I've like got this on my hard drive. It's wild. But yeah, I mean, the amazing thing actually, first working with Björk, when I very first met her, I was like absolutely pooing my pants. Like I was so nervous, and she just came in and was like
I'm
the
nervous just talking
most
about it. I
lovely
mean,
person. Like she was so cool, and just like the second she walked in, you're just like, oh, it just puts you right at ease, and was so like she's hilarious. I don't think many people realize like just how great her sense of humor is and how funny she is and how fun to hang out with. So
I,
as
I
as
I think I've seen a little of that in Breaking the Waves. What is that called?
which
Uh, you know that movie was like the most difficult to watch movie, the last
oh
one.
god, yeah, the Lars von Trier movie,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, anyways,
Yeah.
but that pocket of time in her career of
Hmm.
homogenic Vespertine and
Yeah.
Medulla right after, I mean, was kind of life changing for me
Yeah.
completely. And those 2 albums are still huge for me.
Yeah, I
Huge.
mean, Homogenic was that came out like a month after I moved to London, and that like blew my mind. I thought she was pretty cool, but I got Homogenic was just like, oh my god, this is
I gotta
insane.
ask you because during those years,
Mhm.
I was kind of just so into bebop that I wasn't really in touch with reality. But what was the cultural impact of those 2 albums at the time?
Hmm. Well, I mean, by the time I was like Vespertine didn't come out for another couple of years, and that it's always a weird thing. Once you've worked on a record, you feel it entirely differently to as an audience member. Um, but I think with Homogenic, it was really just like she had shifted into another gear and was kind of like just her whole thing of like defining a universe was exploding. Really, and I think also that it's all tied into me for like moving to London at that time and just feeling so excited about music and just like the craziest stuff is happening and at like the highest level as well. Because also, I don't know if you know a label like Ninja Tune, but like they used to have Cold Cut had a radio show that would be broadcast on Kiss FM at like 1 a.m. on a Saturday night. And like I'd just be staying up and like listening to these radio shows, listening to pirate radio. Björk's record came out, and the flat I lived in London, the kitchen overlooked the stage door of the Brixton Academy, which is one of the main venues there. So
Yeah.
I'd be walking back from the studio, and it's like the Verve are playing or something like that, or walk back one night and literally like Prodigy were playing. I bought tickets off a scalper and went and saw the Prodigy.
Wow. Wow.
So it was just like this really exciting thing of just like there are everywhere you look, there's just these incredible people doing these remarkable things, and I think Björk was just so out on her own. And I think she straddled this really interesting thing where he felt she was entirely related and plugged into like all of the kind of boundary pushing, especially like electronic music that was happening at the time, but that also she was so far above and away from everyone in terms of just like her universe had its own center of gravity, or she had like her own independent black hole at the center of her
Absolutely.
galaxy.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And also
yeah.
just her sense of, I mean, if you put, I don't know if you can even do that, but if you put the lyrics aside and the
Mm,
songwriting, the brilliant songwriting aside, and the vision, I mean, how wide the vision is,
yeah.
and just the kind of audacity she sings with, and
Mm.
beauty and gentleness. Just, her actual phrasing as a vocalist is just out of this world. I mean, just listen to it as a guitarist, learning the
Mhm.
lines. Just the phrase, it's out of this world. I mean, that woman,
It's
wow.
really wild as well. If you ever hear other vocalists covering a Björk song, like
Exactly. That's a
it's just
great
I
example.
mean it's not the same, and that's not like saying better or worse, but I'd rather listen to Björk's version. But yeah, it's the way that she can use her voice and make certain melodic things come alive in a
Yeah,
way that no one else
absolutely.
can is really wild.
And that is, and you guys also tracked live with her? I mean, you guys, you
So in terms of recording live or playing live, I mean,
recording, yeah.
I'm trying to think what we did. A lot of so I was involved in a bunch of the early stages of Vespertine. Basically, at that time when she was making the film with Lars von Trier, Guy would be flying back and forth to Denmark where they were shooting, and they would be just like record Celeste vocal kind of improvisations, and he'd bring them back to London. And then we did a couple of sessions in Iceland, but at that point it was much more like, I recorded like the vocal on Hidden Place, for example. That was like a really early take. But a lot more of what we were doing was like chopping stuff up and dealing more with kind of like the conceptual world. Because she really, for Vespertine, was kind of a perfect storm because, again, for our younger listeners, like imagine a time before being able to like have an entire multi-track of a song on a hard drive on your computer. So it used to be like you'd be able to like fly like 4 or 8 tracks onto to Pro Tools, do some edits, and then put it back on tape. So there's this whole thing where her vision about what you could do with shredding up sound and pulling it into a million pieces was massively influential. But at that same time, like Pro Tools got powerful enough, they had a system called the Mix Plus where you could run 64 channels at once. So Guy and I basically got like one of the first Mix Plus systems in the UK. And Guy as well was like a remarkable visionary. Like he was trained in production by Trevor Horn, and he read music at Cambridge. So he had this combination of being able to play 400-year-old stuff on a harpsichord, and he had perfect pitch. But then he could listen to a pirate radio station and then use a kind of a Cambridge musician's mind to analyze musicologically what was going on. So really, really interesting. But point is, in terms of the technology moving to a point where you could do stuff that no one had ever done before, and really feeling when we were working together that the kind of concept and the technology married up perfectly. So we were doing stuff where it was literally just like drawing individual oscillations of waveforms onto a blank
Wow.
timeline, and then taking other things that were like full recordings and pulling them into individual pieces, and creating just the wildest, choppiest stuff as well. And then Mark Bell from LFO, who passed away sadly a number of years ago, but he was in another room on one of the sessions we did there with Valgeir Sigurdsson. So he was like a pioneer of kind of like a rave. He was basically the first artist to blow up on Warp Records. And his whole approach to how to make music, like he couldn't tell you what a note was, no musical training, but was just like, I can kind of make these crazy noises with these machines. So, a little bit of everything mashed together.
I gotta ask you an old school jazz question. Like
Okay.
I kind of came up in the documentary world where you go to the studio for a day or 2 days and you kind of play and that's it, and then you mix it more, more extensively or less extensively. How long is the process you just described, from working at those stands and cells of sound and flying back and forth, and there's a guy in the other room? I mean, how long is a process like this?
Um, I mean, we can answer it a whole bunch of ways. And in a Björk world, her records tend to take about a year and a half to make. She's kind of writing them at the same time. But from the early stages that I was working on Vespertine, it didn't come out for another 2 years, and she did like a lot more work on it. So, when you get into her world, it's also like the kind of journey of how a record unfolds is very important. So she has her initial ideas or concepts. And then there's a lot of just like, I think she kind of wakes up in the middle of the night and is like, we should fly to Greenland and get a choir, or we should go find an Italian arranger or something like that. So, and I didn't work top to bottom on Vespertine. I worked top to bottom on Volta and Biophilia. And that whole like adventure that she has making a record is really incredible. So, especially on Volta, on Biophilia, they said they wanted me to do the whole record, but on Volta, it was just like I'd get a call and they'd say like, hey, can you come to New York tomorrow for a week? And then you go there, and then you're there, and 5 days into it, she's like, let's go to Jamaica for a month. And then you just like go to Jamaica, and it was like this wild kind of
And what will you do in
journey.
Jamaica for a month? I mean,
she just wanted to, set up and edit, listen, write. She'd fly people in to kind of mess around and play with stuff. And my role with her was, Björk's her own producer, her own visionary, but she likes to collaborate with a ton of people. But so I was kind of like her sidekick. In other words, I'd go with her into all these different situations. So, on Volta, on one hand, we did, there's a song, I can't remember the name of it. It's all just like recorded live vocals and horns that was recorded in New York. And she wrote that like on a piano, and we had my friend Matt Robertson do the arrangement and, or transcribe it for horns. And then there's other songs where, we had a studio for 2 weeks in New York with Timbaland, but it only wound up that her and Timbaland got in the studio for like 45 minutes on 2 days, and they just hit record, and then she'd take it away and edit it for like 4 months or something like that, and write it and turn it into a song. So it's really like any way you could imagine they could be put together. But overall, like not exclusively the kinds of records I make, because I do a lot of stuff with bands and actual like performance-based musicians as well.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is kind of a certain amount of let's have a plan, but the plan is much more like let's try something next and then see what it kind of unfolds, and then it tends to trigger an idea of maybe we should go here and record this person, and or we'll book a day in a studio over there and we'll get these people in, but until then we'll be kind of programming and creating these frameworks, and then leave enough room for spontaneity in the recording.
I have a naive question. In a process that is this extensive, for lack of a better word, how do you choose? I mean, there's just so many details, like Volta. How do you choose a take? I mean, every little thing can be a take. There's just so many variables and so many pieces of.
Yeah, well, I mean, on that side, we'll answer it in two phases as well. So, Björk operates Pro Tools and everything, and she pretty much she likes to comp herself and kind of mess around with that kind of stuff. So she'll comp herself, but with other artists, when I'm working with that, I tend to, once we know that we're going into like what I call like a capture phase, which is just like you say yes to everything and throw as many things as possible into the computer, then I'll like to go off onto a kind of an editing phase. But it's always, comping and stuff is very straightforward. It can be time consuming, but it's really like what's the most compelling or the most emotionally kind of inspired or the most emotionally engaging performance. That also kind of serves a song like melodically or kind of brings out the most in a melody. in parallel to all this, when I was going up back to early days, like I wound up being a silent member of UNKLE for a number of years,
Yeah, yeah.
and making those records was like, James Ovell coming in with a stack of records. And you spoke with Rich File, obviously. So me
Yeah,
and Rich
Rich
were,
was fantastic.
yeah, Rich is amazing. So I basically was a silent member with that incarnation of UNKLE. So, Rich and I would just be hanging out in the studio all the time, just like going through records and trying to chop stuff up and seeing what would work. So that kind of like sample-based methodology of we're looking for the magic combination of things, and to a certain extent our hands are tied because we're only going to find them on records that someone else has already made. You couldn't go, what this needs right now is la da 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 da, and that's like you're going to play it, it's just weeks or whatever of going through, like going nope, 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 and then what the hell is that? And, stick it together. So, with Björk, she would be much more like musically led, and her musical ability was really, really high. Like some songs, she would just come into the studio and say, just going to write this on Sibelius. And she'd literally just click notes onto a stave and like write out a whole song, because she has those kinds of chops. And then other things, she'd be like, I don't ever want to even see like a MIDI keyboard. It's like Biophilia in particular was
Yeah,
her just wanting to do something entirely different.
yeah,
So
and
that
also
that led,
Medulla, I thought was brilliant in that way.
yeah,
The way
yeah.
she used
So
her voice.
yeah, and that again, like she just has a concept, and it's like let's just. And I think I can't say this for sure, but I think part of the thing with Medulla was like she just couldn't be bothered with another sampler or synthesizer, so it was like, well, let's do it all with vocals. But then she still applied like the kind of electronic headspace of we're going to take all
Yeah,
these things and like manipulate them and
and
mess
also
them up.
expansiveness of vision.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
But it's a funny
So
thing with vision. Have you ever seen there's like this Alan Watts talk about it's like the unbleached silk and the uncarved block, and it's a discussion about the difference between kind of the Western art and aesthetic philosophies and Eastern art aesthetics and philosophies, which tends to be like the Western art in general, you could say, is typified by like Michelangelo, which is saying there's a block of marble and there's a sculpture in there, and I'm going to break the marble until my vision is left, and that's totally cool. Whereas like the Eastern thing, you could say, oh my God, here's an absolutely beautiful stone. Let's build everything around this thing and like make it
yeah.
even more beautiful and more natural. So it's like the kind of thing where you interact with the process and let the process be your collaborator, not just your own ideas, and then try and force the process to conform to that.
Well, I actually believe that jazz kind of forces you to do both at the same time. Like
Yeah.
there's going to be a structure, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have to adhere to it, and you have to respect it, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
see what you can do to add to it. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot just, but at the same token, you're also expected to rebel against whatever is the structure or whatever was the generation before you or the language itself, or just uh, or just it
I
could be
guess
actually
obviously you have so much of a response to the people you're playing with in real time, right? It's all about like the actual real time response to things that are happening, and listening is as important as what you're conveying yourself. Would that be fair?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
I mean,
Your
it's
thing
fun.
only works if the drummer does his own thing at the same time, and
Hmm.
they intuitively collide
So
or
what
combine.
can I ask you a question?
I'm
Like what was it that pulled you into jazz as a musical universe? Was there like, were you just listening to top 40 radio and then one day did you hear this other thing, or
Well, I think it was two things. It's actually three things, and I actually still feel this way because I still feel myself being pulled into jazz on a daily basis. Uh, the first was wanting to take my interest and my curiosity with the guitar further. There was a minute in musical history where being an instrumental guitarist was a thing. People from Steve Vai created this entire niche of people who are not playing in a band. They're instrumental and their music is up front. And then I went into music high school, or like high school for the arts in Tel Aviv, which 90% of any Israeli musician kind of like working in the States somewhere, we all went to the same high school. Kind of
amazing?
very similar to that to LaGuardia High School in New York. So and it was all about jazz. And for me, I kind of heard Coltrane, and it was kind of it for me. And then there was and there's something about the art of creating in the moment. There's something about to not having to repeat yourself ever, or having actually you're actually responsible to never repeat yourself if you can help it. And there's something about, I mean, just that mindset of living your life as an improvising musician. It kind of, it goes to anything you do. It goes into the way you do relationships, the way you cook, and the way you do business, or um, everything is a work in process, and everything is a work in progress, and it forces you to respect your team, and to always see yourself as a member of a team, and it forces you to because you cannot play jazz alone. It'll never work. And if you think of yourself as a star, you're not gonna sound like a homogenic part of a band. And it comes up what you basically practice on a daily basis is coming up with new melodies and new ways of looking at melody, harmony. So you're always composing in a way.
Can you
And
unpack that a little bit? Like when you say like new ways of coming up with melody, and like you obviously have a practice around that. Side note, like I do this Twitch stream from my studio, and I'm like mostly doing electronic music. But one of the things I encourage people to do, I have this little timer, and it's like set a 55-minute timer, and you just have to create something in that time and then print it, and that's it. So it's like this whole thing about being very, very fluid with just like generating and releasing ideas.
I do exactly the same. Exactly the same. I have like I don't have a timer, but
Hmm.
I practice like in segments of 20 to hopefully not longer than 40 minutes on an idea.
Okay.
Uh, but I try to take out a chunk of at least 3.5 to 4.5 hours to practice every day.
Okay.
And I work on a few things, but it's exactly that. You take but it's a little more structured. Like I would take a song.
Hmm.
It could be a Gershwin song, or it could be a John Coltrane song. It's gonna be one of the songs that I wrote that I'm trying to get better at, and I will improvise on it in a specific tempo. And but you have to play things that you didn't play before in a way.
Right.
You have to come to. I mean, that's kind of like the thing. You cannot really repeat yourself, and that mindset puts you in a it creates a situation where you keep expanding your vocabulary, hopefully.
Amazing. When you're improvising, it's not just. I mean, I'm saying this as like hopefully it's obvious, but it's not just a case of I'm going to play any notes that aren't the main melody. But like, can you share with me any tips about like there's a melody and I want to reference the melody without directly repeating it, or like like create this different version? Like, what's the kind of threshold for you between
So,
like going off the deep end and still staying true to the underlying message of a melody?
so let's say there's a song, any song that everybody knows, like "Knocking on Heaven's Door." So you have the structure, those. It's a 4-bar form, and it's like 3 chords, or actually 4 chords if you want to take the minor relative mark. So you it, people say that you can play whatever you want in jazz, but that's actually so far from the truth. You either play notes that relate to the chord that's just being played. Like if there's G, then I'm either playing notes from the chord, or notes from the scale, or notes that are not from the chord and not from the scale, and I have to understand the tension. If there's a G at the bottom, and I'm playing a flat triad, that I have the responsibility to know what's the clashing harmony going to feel like. And the more vocabulary you have, then against the G you can play C, and against the G you can play D. You can play D flat. You can play E flat. You can play F sharp major, F sharp minor. And the more you have, like if you spend the last 45 years sitting at home for 4 hours a day trying to learn those relationships, then you have all those colors to kind of paint with. But it's all within the structure of the song, the physical structure of the song, the chords of the song, but more importantly, the melody of the song, like you said, and the emotional impact of the song. If it has its the point for choose, like what makes, let's say you have a gig and you want to choose a song, a set list, you choose them according to the emotional impact that it will have on the audience. But I'm the audience as well. I mean, as I'm improvising, there's a little fan in me who likes to hear music a certain way, and I kind of close my eyes and I'm trying to play the things that I would love to hear the most, just as a listener.
Do you feel like there's a are you able to separate the performer and the observer? I mean, you've just said you can, but I find that a really fascinating
I,
concept or trick for people to like learn how to listen to what they're working on based on like different principles and perspectives depending on what they're trying to achieve at a certain point in time.
so I'm going to answer in two phases.
Okay. Do it, man.
There's the Western way
Mhm.
and there's the Eastern way. No, I'm,
Right.
I'm actually serious. But
Yeah.
so the Western way says there's the guy who plays the guitar, and physically plays the guitar, and that same guy hears a note in his mind, and that note translates to the guitar. So there's a guy who's physically playing and supposed to listen to what he's playing, what the others are playing, what's supposed to come next. But there's also a part of you that tries to stay completely out of the process in a very, I don't want to use the word zen, but in a very non-conscious way. There's a and I think many people have their own little tricks to get there. Some people, like you could be, let's say you're working with a vocalist and they're writing lyrics. If you put the radio on, it's going to distract them in just the right way, so the subconscious mind is at the page and the conscious mind is at the radio. So that metaphor, I'm trying to use that as a metaphor to, you're in the process, but you're also trying to stay out of the process and let the process dictate. If this makes any sense, and I really don't enjoy taking things to a not a physical realm, but it's really where it's at. It's really where it's at because at the heart of the matter, what you and I are doing is creating energy, sound waves and energy that clashes in a way that excites us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why it excites us. We don't know what makes sound clashes in a certain way. Why a semitone works a certain way and an octave works another way. Why consonants and dissonance the way I mean at a certain it's also primal,
Mm-hmm.
which is really
Absolutely.
why I'm not losing hope with music technology or music business, because at the end of the day, you're still that kid that went out and saw the Verve playing and try to get a ticket. There's something you cannot. There's something untangible about it. Like there's it's all very primal because they make you feel a certain way. You went to a Prodigy concert really at the prime years, and it made your whole body kind of behave a certain way just because of what they were doing. And it's primal in the same way that people were living in caves and listening to the wind, kind of clashes against the cave wall and creating a sound, and they were like, wow.
I love that you brought that up because actually I came across a scientific paper yesterday. I did some random Googling, and it was basically an actual scientific paper talking about. I was looking for something about. I'd read an article years ago about changes in frequency across time being linked with more emotional music. And it was basically a scientific paper that was talking about changing frequency response both in music and in natural sounds instills an emotional response in us of all these different kinds from, like basic survival stuff, but they specifically were talking about, the early evolution of us as beings trying to survive in the wild, and just like keying into the way that the frequency response would change in our environment, and the fact that we can kind of control that through music is insane. But yeah, I remember realizing really early on basically that music was a incredibly powerful tool as a listener or as a music fan that you could use to
Absolutely, yeah.
completely transform your subjective experience of the world around you. It's
So I'm totally with that, except that I don't relate to the word control as much as I get participate, because I can
Mhm.
imagine you in the studio. It could be with the Killers, or it could be with Bjork, and you don't really control the magic.
Oh,
You
I mean much
participate.
more as a listener, like as a music fan, you go like, oh, I'm going to
Yeah.
put on an
Yeah,
Autechre
yeah,
record and go for a drive, and now every line out now it looks like I'm driving in Mars. But yes, I've learned early on that there's some kind of trope out there about producers being like Phil Spector with a gun on the console, and that
Oh yeah,
producer is someone
yeah,
who's going to tell you what you have to do, and it's absolutely like, at least if anyone's working with me, it's not the case at all. It's much more like, I'm going to help you achieve the thing it is you want to as directly as possible. But yeah, almost any artist who's like incredible is not waiting for someone to tell them what to do, you know.
I was actually listening to All Things Must Pass today,
Hmm.
and that's a Spectre production. And really cannot imagine that guy in the room with all those people singing Hare Krishna. It's Krishna Krishna. You know what I mean? With the hairdo and the dogs. I mean, I just cannot imagine it. But
I think in film they
uh,
would call that a character arc, right?
absolutely. So
Yeah.
I want to ask you about two other bands that are huge for me. I mean, the
Hmm.
first is the Killers.
Hmm.
I remember the first time I heard the Killers, and again, at the time that they broke out, I was just such a jazz snob that, but I don't remember the impact. I remember the first time I heard it, I think it was Mr. Brightside. And the first thing was the drummer. I mean, who's that drummer? It's unbelievable.
Hmm.
And then just the impact that they had and this forward motion, and it's really unbelievable. So what was the process like for you with them? I mean, it's completely different.
Oh, that's a really interesting one. I mean, it's funny because I worked with them, I think around 2012 on a record called Battleborn, and that was pretty much just after I finished like a 6-year full-time run with Björk. Because basically my kids were really young at the time, and she was starting another project, and it wound up being like, okay, I don't think I can be on call for another, 2 years or something like that. But it was funny because I'd spent so much time with Björk, where like, oh, we're going to like get a Faraday cage built with like a Tesla coil, like that became normal. So then going in and working with the Killers, I was actually telling my friends, I was like, it's crazy. They have like these pieces of
it's
wood, right?
it's like a
And you
guitar
stretch a
amp.
piece of metal across it.
Yeah.
And then if you press your finger there, the note changes. It's crazy. So, yes. And they have these cylinders that you stack up, and all you have to do is hit it, and it goes boom. So
Wow,
so that was
wow.
kind of trippy, but I mean, it's interesting. A lot of stuff with band things, not always, but often is, especially more successful bands, a lot of it is just kind of much more of how do we navigate the personalities and what's going on at this point in time and try to bring people together to get a result. And it was a little bit challenging because they were just pulling different people in and out of the process the whole time. So that was also, I think, for me, the first record I worked on where there was kind of a revolving door of people coming in and out,
But
including myself.
let's set politics aside for a second. Let's talk
Yeah.
about just the sound. I mean, you guys
Well,
were, I'm
but
assuming, are
that
they tracking live?
but that's exactly what I'm trying to say. So you're working on a record with someone. Everyone's on the same page. This is what we're doing, and then the session finishes. Okay, we'll carry on next time we come back.
Ah,
You
I see
come
where you're
back,
going.
you know. Oh, Steve recorded these drums, and now it doesn't sound as exciting. Well, can we re-record the drums? No.
Ah,
Do you know what I mean? Steve says he fixed all these mistakes, but then you go through and you realize like there's no energy. So it's not there. It was just literally like the continuity that you normally have in your relationship and guiding a creative project was just more broken up. So once I kind of realized like we're just gonna roll with it, it was fine. Um, and there's very very interesting situation where actually getting them to play together was very difficult. Um, this sounds a little bit weird. So
no, I
there's a song
understand.
on there called what's it called? It's got a whoa, 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 whoa kind of vocal on there. Anyway, I landed in Vegas in the morning. I'd wake up at like 3 a.m. to fly from Montreal to get the early flight, land in Vegas in time. I'm waiting to like pick up my rental car, and their manager phones me up and goes, "Yo, they've got this song. It's gonna be a single. Like, just go in there and kill it." It's like, okay. And then turn up, and it's like, okay, we recorded this when we were jamming, and they didn't want to play it again, but it's like 10 BPM too slow.
Oh,
So that record was wild because you'd have all of these recordings which weren't actually the ideal performance of the song, and you're trying to like shoehorn them into the right situation. Not all of them, but it was this really, really weird thing where they kind of wanted to move forward and things were moving forward, but the lead single off that I think was a song called Runaways,
yeah.
and the record is okay, but that had been worked on by like again different producers before. Like it was one of those records that been or tracks that had been around forever. And I remember the first time I actually heard them play it live once the whole thing was figured out was like, and I saw them at, I think after a show, and I said a joke. It's like what you should do is spend a year finishing your record and then record it in one day, because they're such a good live band.
Absolutely. Yeah,
But
yeah.
so
They're
that was
amazing,
that.
man.
Yeah, so that's kind of. I mean, just being fully transparent. Like I really enjoyed working on it. It was an amazing experience, and I feel like I did everything I could to make it as good as possible. But I wish we could have done it a little bit differently.
Absolutely. I can
Um,
imagine there's in these situations there's just so much of it is chemistry,
yeah,
and sometimes the chemistry is working when it's not working. Like it's
yeah,
not working for the people, it's working for the music, and vice versa. And it's just
yeah.
so
I mean, the
so
records, the songs on that album I do love the most are kind of more the weirder, quieter ones. Like there's a song called "Be Still," which Brandon actually wrote with Daniel Lanois. So it's kind of very inspired by like the atmosphere of that demo. Then there's one called "Deadlines and Commitments," and I was the only producer on that one, so I think just feeling like it was a lot more kind of cohesive worked really well. But I find just working with any artist, it's always really interesting about like what's the way they work, what's the way their process works. How can you get the best out of them? But then there's also a certain amount of respecting, like they are kind of going to do a little bit of what they're going to do. It's not like you're getting a domestic animal that you're training. You kind of, yeah, just,
hopefully.
and for me, I think like where I do feel lucky is I've worked in so many different ways. Like I'm kind of well known for like a lot of the more like electronic or weirder stuff. But I'm very at home with kind of live musicians in that kind of situation. So it's just like, which is a roundabout way of saying it's like I've got more in my toolbox than just a hammer. You know
Oh,
what I
of
mean? I've
course,
also
of
got a
course.
wrench and a screwdriver. So you can just kind of bring in what they need. So a lot of what they wanted from me was just like build on what we've got and just like bring some kind of weird stuff to the table. But then I'm also trying to make sure we get like the right vocals and helping the guitarist like carve out the solo and.
I
So
think what
it's an
I
interesting
think
one.
what people most always forget is in these kind of situations that ordinary you cannot expect extraordinary music from ordinary people. They're going to
Yeah,
have they're going to have their thing,
yeah.
for better or for worse, and
Yeah.
sometimes both at the same time.
Totally, totally. And actually, I mean, one of the greatest joys of working on that record was I got to meet Alan Moulder and hang out with him, who was like,
Ah,
one of my heroes. So
yeah,
like,
yeah,
the early Curve records and stuff. And I remember
absolutely.
like they got him into New York to mix, so we were over there for a session. I remember actually going back to my hotel room each night after we'd been in the studio all day, and then just suddenly remembering another record that he had made that was like, oh my God, he made that record, and kind of losing my mind. But I set up in the live room with a whole station, just doing additional kind of programming and editing and recording, and he was mixing in the control room. And I just remember just like anytime I'd like look up from my little zone and see like Alan through the glass, just like working, 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 and that was very, very inspiring. But
So I want to ask you probably the last question for the day and the most
mhm,
important one for anyone who's watching this. Uh, you mentioned earlier that you were at that studio for 15 bucks an hour,
mhm.
just taking anything that comes through the door. Now that you choose, that you curate your discography very carefully, what makes you take a project on?
So I have a quite a clear kind of way that it's a loose process. I'm going to say a jazz thing. There's a structure within which a whole bunch of improvisation can happen.
Yeah.
Um, and basically, if I get sent a project, I listen with a very specific kind of brain on, and it's just when I listen to this can be a really rough demo. Like, does it resonate with me in whatever way. Like, is there something there? Is there a je ne sais quoi about this artist or this project? And if that's a yes, then I ask myself a next question, which is, can I see myself bringing something to the table for this artist? Like, do I feel like I have a complementary vibration where I know I could actually serve their music well? So that's pretty much I listen like very loosely and very broadly. And then if both of those are a yes, then I would move into let's set up a call and see how we get on as personalities, just a chat like this. Like, you seem nice. So, but it's literally like, I'm at the point as well where in my 20s, I could happily burn up a few months in a room with anyone. And now it's like, if I'm going to
Yeah,
be spending time in
I feel the
close,
same way.
yeah. So
There were a couple of tours in a van for a week or 2 weeks with some people that
mm.
there's no amount of money to get me to go to them. I mean, really, I'm down.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from there, if all of those are in line, then you start looking at logistical stuff like, what do they actually want? It tends to be the kind of records that I work on aren't the records that are done in a day, unfortunately. So then there's a whole like logistical and the business side. What do we have available? Can I actually see myself delivering what I think they want or need or would expect with the resources that are available? And quite often in those situations, if that logistic stuff doesn't line up, I'll suggest, hey, I think at this point in time, why don't you do this? And then maybe we can talk about doing that together.
Yeah,
So I'm at a point now
that's
where
actually a great advice for anyone who's watching this and wants to work with you, because
yeah,
it lets people know that they don't have to have all the answers right now. They can come
yeah,
and start a dialogue,
yeah,
and maybe that will spark something a year from now.
totally. Yeah. I mean, it's worth saying, like, I got to work with Björk very early on the early stages of Vespertine, but then I literally sent her manager an email every 6 months for 6 years before, or it was 5 years before I actually got the call, and then I worked with her full time again. So I'm a really, really big believer in there is the mysterious, mystical process of the planets need to be in line for you to work together.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of people where I've met them and it didn't work out at that time, and then it happens later on. So I'm also very relaxed. Like, I don't force projects or anything either. And I'm happy to kind of have so many other fun things to keep me busy at the moment as well.
That's really the best advice you could ever give. Damian, man, thanks so much for doing this. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Oh,
We've
it's
been
a
talking
joy.
so
We could
long.
talk all day, couldn't we? Yeah, I want to
Absolutely.
interview you for a
Man,
few hours.
the truth is that I might ask you to come on board again, because we didn't talk about mics, preamps, techniques. No, I'm serious. I'm actually
No,
serious.
let's do, like, I'd be bang up. I was just in
so
my
much
head. I was
shit
like,
that I wanted to steal from you, and I'm
yeah,
not getting any of it.
let's have our nerd conversation like another time. Yeah, bang up for it. Let's do it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
cool.
Man, stay safe. The best for you guys, and we'll talk real soon.
Awesome, dude. Take care.